So these are what we staff to now, so in a perfect world, these would be the class sizes
As well as the ratio.
as well as the ratios.
Classroom and class, and students per teacher.
Correct.
The way
Yes.
facilities talks about it is there are boxes and there are belly buttons. So boxes are classrooms,
Yes.
belly buttons are kids, right?
Okay.
So number of kids is different, the way they spread it across.
We
It's
wish
just
they
a
came in
kind of-
sixes.
And we do.
So what we did then with plans 3 and 4 is we still generate teachers based on these ratios.
One teacher per box.
Right.
Correct.
That's right.
We're presuming that classes we would target at these numbers. And so that ends up being the delta here.
Right, that's per belly button.
So I
Yeah.
have,
4 is per belly button.
Yep.
Yes.
And it will actually work belly buttons in the block.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
so
Okay.
I have at Kokanee for, I guess they're not gonna have full day, right? So I have at Maywood 5 full day kindergartens. And I'm targeting 24 kids per teacher. So I have 1 floating teacher, 2 floating teachers.
It'll depend, I mean, I
per
don't,
classroom.
you'd have to look at the detail behind these to see exactly where are these 7.5 classrooms created.
It ranges from Fernwood would have 5 additional teachers that did not have a classroom assigned to them. So
Because
That's
it's
the high
it's a
water
big
mark.
school. And smaller schools might have 2 or 3. And then the schools that have space won't have any
Won't have any.
assigned teachers. They'll just expand into the available classrooms.
Same as
Make
they do,
some
same-
lower class
same
sizes.
sizes.
Isn't the ratio for kindergarten required at 18 now though, or 17?
Well, so by generating the staffing using the lower ratios, we meet the K-3 ratio by delivering all that certificated staff to the building. Even though we have classrooms with more kids in them, we still have the same number of certificated teachers as if we use the lower ratio. And we can use that higher number of certificated teachers to meet the state ratios for funding.
And that's the state's goal, and they're not even there. They're not close at any school.
Yeah, that's
When
the
you-
So
requirement.
What's the
highest-
requirement?
The state, it's not a requirement yet. That's
Next
where the
year?
state, no. They're funding K and 1 highest poverty districts at a lower rate than they're funding someone like us. But that's not even close to 17 yet. Those high poverty districts in the state.
So the 13, okay, so the smaller class size hasn't gotten pushed through yet.
No.
It's just the full day kindergarten.
Yes.
Correct.
Or funding, from a funding perspective, but not a
Not a class size.
not a class size.
Yes.
Well, so what's the requirement by law, by the legislature for class size?
There's no specific requirement for class size. There is a ratio at kindergarten through 3rd grade that we have to have a certain number of teachers per every 1,000 students.
Per belly.
At
49 certificated instructional staff district-wide for every 1,000 kids.
So
So
the instructional staff doesn't necessarily need a teacher, correct? Or
it
does
could
it?
be the librarian, the music.
PE specialist.
I've been hearing this
Certificated
lately,
teacher,
I don't
but it
think I
doesn't mean
realized.
Yeah, they hold a teaching certificate.
Yeah, it could be a teacher that didn't have an assigned classroom.
Yeah, it's not, doesn't have to be the homeroom teacher.
but they're still supporting somewhere in K-3.
So the,
I was gonna say, just for clarification, my understanding is that the elementaries, a lot of times, the PE teacher or the music teacher has a room that the students kind of move to and then go back to their
That's
normal
correct,
classroom,
yes.
but they will basically have a full day with one prep period in which they're serving students all day long. And then when they go to the PE room or to the music room, then the teacher largely has their classroom perhaps quiet to themselves
That's
for just
typical.
1 hour or one period of the day.
Right.
Okay,
Periods more second,
So
so a chunk of time.
right, however that
prep period,
particular.
right, the
but-
45
right, but I
minutes,
just-
right.
But that's a way in which you get a teacher, that helps your teacher ratio, because the music teacher who deals with students all day long is a teacher, and that
Right.
helps your ratio, and they're dealing with students all day long. That's correct. Yes.
So
Just to clarify.
in the, as Jeff did the math and kind of modeled plans 3 and 4, the modified class size ratio. And again, this is based on current projected enrollment by school, by grade level, and configured classrooms. So that will, it's a constantly moving target all the time.
Imperfect science.
Yeah, but looked at, so on a school-by-school basis, what would the range of class sizes be? So you can see the high average on a school basis, or the low average, the high average on a school basis, and then the district-wide average on a school basis. Again, using these modified targets right here.
And that's belly buttons per box.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. No, it's very useful, Ryan, I appreciate it. Keep coming with it.
I just don't know how you teach 27 to kindergartners. High.
Well, the idea would be in those kind of classrooms that floating teacher would provide support. So they may break up literacy groups, they may break up math groups. I mean, there is another teacher available to support that. It's
Between
not,
4 classes.
right, right. It's not double teachers in the classroom.
Right, and I guess the question is that max average class size by building, is that, like, are there 3 elementary schools that are right at that, or there's an elementary school that's at that, at one of them, and then the other 4 or 5 grades, they're closer to the average?
I would say, I think the latter. So there's, I mean, one of the difficult things about this is it ignores the fact that 9 of the schools are going to be able to lower class sizes because they have space. So some of the higher max average class sizes are actually at the small level, because this is all just mathematically derived.
Right.
Some of those max class sizes that are in smaller buildings, where if you crank the ratios up like that, you don't have enough kids like you do at Fernwood. You might have, you're taking 7 first grades and turning it into 6. You might, at East Ridge or Cottage Lake, you might have 2 first grades you're turning into 1 first grade and a 1-2 split. And those numbers, if depending on what kind of package the kids come in, those numbers might be very high. The mitigation at Cottage Lake is they have room, they'll just have another classroom and they will lower class sizes that way. So it's, I mean, the issue is that it sucks all the capacity out of the system, certainly. But I would say at most of the large schools, the class sizes are going to be closer to the district-wide average that you see on the bottom, because they have enough classes per grade level to spread those students across.
If you have 7 and you go to 6, you can pick that.
Right, no, there's a scale of time, that's what I'm saying, the bottom columns here in Plan 3 and 4 don't scare me as much as I was expecting to be scared.
So is it safe to say, Jeff, kind of in general, we shouldn't necessarily presume that these high water marks we see are in the already really big schools? More of them may be in the smaller schools because of the scale they
fifth graders
deal
in.
with.
Yeah. Okay, so the difficult schools will be West Hill.
Yes.
That is, it's not, by our current standards, it's not a large school. By our old standards, 500 and some kids. And they won't have space. And so there are some places where there will be class sizes on the higher end. But again, as you said, Larry, a lot of that is reflective of the smaller schools that will be able to mitigate class size simply by using their available class size, or class room space.
So do we, with capacity issues being a problem for a lot of districts, do you know of anyone who's ever tried this? I'm curious kind of from an instructional practice standpoint, you know, with the floating teacher, do you know of anyone who's?
Well, that's
I
not
think we've
impressive.
had resource teachers before when enrollments come in
Right.
high and it's October and it's too late to divvy up the kids a different way, so a resource teacher has been added to provide.
So we do have experience from a teaching
I
standpoint?
think we have that at Wooden this year.
Yeah, much smaller.
Much
scale.
This is where I
Yeah, much
think,
smaller.
There's
again,
districts that
there's-
don't ever pass bond, construction bonds and have classes in stairwells. So, I mean, I would say there are probably districts across the state that run high class sizes because they don't have
And so
classrooms.
I've been reading that in other districts, and I don't know if it's true or not, that they're going to full day kindergarten.
So we
and
can
right
talk
next
about
to us.
that. We can talk about that.
And we've got a
And
slide.
so if they're going, okay.
And maybe, I mean, no, we all need to get done, so can I make a recommendation?
I didn't know
Yeah.
that this is the next slide.
No,
That's why.
because I just, could we let Larry go through all the slides real quick? And then, because the board has to,
I have a question, I want to.
Oh, I was just gonna say, but I was just gonna say, we don't let him go through real quick and then we can get into the discussion.
All right, so let's get into the cost aspects of all of this. So, I would just say that all of these cost plans presume that any full-day kindergarten that we offer, we will receive state funding for. So we had more columns on here that had what the impacts would be if we were still charging tuition. We've taken those off, one, to simplify the slide, but two, because, again, our operating principle has been, once we can capture state funding for full-day kindergarten, we're not justified in being able to charge tuition for it any longer. So, kind of to go back down here, we will receive additional revenue for each of these plans because of the state funding the other half of all the full-day kindergarten students. And what you see is obviously Plan 4, because all of the students are in full-day kindergarten, receives the most additional state funding. And then each plan also, you know, we have more teachers, we have additional costs. I'll say in Plan 1, thank you, Doug, because we operate the Northshore Primary Center there, that $580,000 reflects sort of the infrastructure costs of running the primary center, having a base staff to run that school, you know, principal, office manager, school assistants, those kinds of things.
What are we doing with that, because we're still paying?
So this does not include the rent cost, because that's already in the budget. So these are incremental costs, these are additional costs.
Do we know what we're doing with that, or is that, will we be informed of what choice we're making to do?
Well, depending on which choice we make, if we don't, obviously if we don't use the primary center in this particular plan, we are already processing and thinking about other ways we could utilize the primary center. So, looking here like at transportation, again, remember Plan 1 moves around the greatest number of students, and so the incremental transportation cost is the greatest for that plan. Conversely, with Plans 3 and 4, because we anticipate that class sizes across the district in general would be higher, we will have additional contractual overload relief to provide to teachers, because we have, you know, bargain language that specifies certain remedies when classes exceed certain numbers.
So I have a question, will that, there's something in the contract language that says they can either take more money or they can choose to have an aid. Will they still, they'll have that choice to take, is that true that that's in the bargaining language?
I don't know exactly what it is.
Sub-release or paid.
So in all these, there, we might not have a second teacher then if they choose to take more pay, is that correct?
No.
They're not linked.
They're not like,
Okay, so when do they get paid over? If there's an overload in all these classes, you have one teacher per, you have a resource teacher for 4 classes, let's say, but my class load is 29 students for me. Now I get paid more even though I have a resource teacher?
Yeah, that's my
Yes.
question, is it ratio or box?
So, we believe, association representatives.
Well, I mean, this is a study session where I think we should have
No,
more
no, I
at the
don't
table.
mind
I wish
answering
that-
that's your question. We believe that the number of teachers that, a number of students that teacher has that's assigned to that classroom will determine the overload pay, and not a building-wide certificate and staffing ratio. So if the named first grade teacher has 27 students in his or her class, that would be the determinant for overload.
regardless of what assistance they may be
Regardless of what
receiving
assistance
from
we provide.
a teacher without a
Oh, well,
classroom
that's
who might be
good to know.
supporting them.
And then what happens to the resource teacher? So you're the 7th first grade teacher and you don't have a classroom, where do you, not the other 6 teachers are getting an overload, and where do you fall in that?
Well, they don't have an assigned caseload. Now, historically, we've used resource teachers in a relatively limited sense. I mean, we might have a few every year at elementary level, and there's never been a caseload that drives overload. That might be one of those things that we could end up arguing over.
So, kind of back to this, so you just see that there are different, because of the different elements of the various plans, there are different cost factors associated with them, whether it's, so, more transportation here, more overload here. Operating the primary center here, not operating the primary center there. So they are all different in that regard.
When you say teacher overloads including for modified staffing, are you saying their overload pay plus the extra resource teacher?
Correct. So, but remember, the extra resource teacher isn't additional. That teacher, if we didn't have to do any of this plan, that teacher would be generated anyway, just based on our regular ratios, right? Okay.
Slash belly button.
So, you can see here the net general fund impact ranges from, projected $736,000 in Plan 2 to, 1.5 and then about 1.2, 1.1, 1.2 Plans 3 and 4. But then you also have to consider what are the non-general fund impacts of these. So portables, again, remember there's a different number of portables. Plan 2 projects 16 portables if we could get all 16 of those sited and purchased. So that has a very high capital cost associated with it, as well as capital costs for purchasing additional buses based on how much additional transportation each plan is going to require. So, the plans vary. They vary with the general fund, they vary with the capital fund. And again, part of what we've been wrestling with is, as we've looked at those sort of directions that we took away from our meetings with the board in October, we wanted to minimize capital costs on portables that wouldn't be necessary in 17-18. We wanted to minimize the number of students moving around. We wanted to maximize the ability to capture full day kindergarten funding. So these plans are various attempts to operationalize those directions. But what ends up happening is that they prioritize and drive different costs in different areas between the general fund and capital expenses.
Well, it sounds like it wasn't the board's directive that changed, it was the state that changed. They changed their funding model, which has changed.
The plans
Now-
changed because of the state, right?
Right,
Right, the
so-
board guidance was the same and they're working within the board guidance.
Right, but that was the change, or we would
Yes.
have gone with what we already planned.
You got it.
I would assume.
Yeah.
B and E model.
Yeah.
We
These are better than
don't
B and E.
wanna be talking about this again.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
We
so
let them just stop. What's about?
you'd asked about sort of what are other districts doing. So these districts are currently providing full day kindergarten. Yeah, to everyone, and I would add Shoreline to that list as well. These districts, at least that we are talking to, are saying that they believe they are going to be able to implement full-day kindergarten. And as was mentioned at the board meeting tonight, Mukilteo will not. They are continuing to target 17-18, so they're building a new elementary school and they're building a kindergarten center that they hope to have online by 17-18.
And Bellevue currently provides.
Good idea.
And Bellevue already currently provides full day
Issaquah
kindergarten.
is not.
Issaquah is not, they have space limitations that will not allow them to.
So they're down with.
So they have definitively said no.
Correct, yes.
So these other school districts that are adding they're adding full-day kindergarten, they don't have the space constraints that, because I thought every district had space constraints, like Washington and Everett and.
We're,
They're adding portables, but they don't seem to be having, are they
So-
doing the same thing with the resource teacher or?
well, it's hard to know exactly, their staffing standard may already be that they have larger classes than we do in our district, so it's hard to know exactly what
Mitigation.
what mitigation options they're looking at. And we haven't gone into that level of detail. We've sort of just asked the very 10,000-foot question of, are you going to be able to go implement full-day kindergarten or not? And these are the response we're getting. We're still a bit mystified by Lake Washington.
Yeah, I thought they didn't have any room.
Well, particularly up on the plateau, I'm not certain, but they're telling us that it sort of depends on who you talk to at Lake Washington, but I'm taking my word from the superintendent. He says, no, we're going there, so that's all, I can tell you just what I know.
I think it's important to note too, with Lake Washington, they have the same issues with, needing to add portables or adding additional space, they're repurposing classroom space, and they have a long-term need as well to go out for a bond measure, because this is a short-term enrollment mitigation strategy. So long-term, they need bond.
Which Redmond ES?
Elementary school.
Elementary school.
So kind of our outreach to date, we talked about this and sort of presented this dilemma and the challenge at our October PTSA luncheon and got some good feedback from folks that you've seen in your briefing, and it was a little bit kind of all over the board. E-News Connections, I've written some pieces around this. We've had pieces on the website, on social media. Some of what I've written, as well as some of our local papers, have just kind of covered the story in general, so there have been some articles around there about that. We've had extensive processing with elementary principals around this, with our instructional council, and with NSCA leadership, and I believe you heard accurately sort of their position on all of these at tonight's meeting. Future outreach opportunities, I mean, our hope would be that we would have a nodding consensus tonight from the board on which direction we want to proceed with, so that we can push that out with some greater level of clarity and specificity, again, through our regular channels. We do have the conversations with the board coming up on January 5th. We have community partners that we need to be talking with and are talking with already. YMCA champions, et cetera, that currently utilize some of our spaces. We're already in conversation with them. Obviously, our school support organizations are great places to connect with. And then, what other outreach needs or direction the board may desire. Kind of our timeline, so.
We didn't want you to miss.
Wow, that got bullet. Let me make sure we weren't gonna miss that. So,
Good job.
presuming that there's consensus tonight, or there's not consensus tonight, might influence or change how we would start pushing communication out to families and staff as early as tomorrow. So I haven't written anything for E-News or Connections yet. I'm hoping that sort of whatever the outcome of this conversation is will be my topic in those pieces. We would like to feel the need to submit any new portable orders by December 23rd to guarantee both pricing and delivery, because as you can see, we're not the only one out there in the world that's going after portables. So there's going to be a premium on those, as there has been the last year or two. The January 5th, again, is the conversations with the board. We're hoping for board action on one of the plans, one of the options on January 12th. We then begin the planning and implementation. So how do we take this off the page? Obviously, we are looking at numbers, projected enrollment, that's 10 months out. So this is going to continue to need to be monitored, massaged, refined as we move between now and September. Getting that communication out to families about here's the plan for next year, and then kindergarten registration starts on January 19th. So being able to get all of those pieces communicated out to folks. And it's not just kindergartners. Again, this speaks more broadly to enrollment mitigation in general. We're sort of talking about kindergarten, but that's the lever of addressing overall enrollment and capacity at our schools. So just some final considerations. And again, at the cabinet level, we have processed this every week for multiple times a week for the last couple of months. Each plan is decidedly imperfect. Each one prioritizes that board direction a little bit differently. They each present different trade-offs between either the general fund or the capital project fund or the transportation vehicle fund. So there are different impacts and variable impacts based on those. Again, as a reminder, each plan is only a one-year solution because we are heading towards a longer-term solution in 17-18 with boundary adjustments, with grade reconfiguration. Each plan positions us a little bit differently for 17-18 transition, both from a staffing standpoint, from having portables that we may or may not need in 17-18, different impacts to staff and families, different levels of flexibility in the event that enrollment particularly comes in higher than what we anticipate. And I think this is the one that we've been talking about a great deal, is just that importance for clarity and commitment once a plan is landed upon. If we start in earnest marching down Plan X road in May or April, I don't believe we're gonna have the capacity to turn tail and go Plan Y road, you know.
And back to Kimberly's point, we cannot change this, this was the state.
Well, the funding,
Still.
certainly the funding assumptions
Missed the
changed a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we have wrestled and wrestled and wrestled with this, and Kevin and I think that we have all at one time made arguments for and against each plan in different respects. So we did a little exercise yesterday where we did some value voting on each of the plans, which we generally have never done in cabinet before, but there didn't seem to be a more reasonable way for us to kind of develop a recommendation or a consensus to bring to you. So our prioritization,
Three. It's obvious.
no, that's for Plan 4.
Plan 4. Plan
Um,
1.
So plans 3 and 4, I would say, were pretty not drastically different from one another as far as how they kind of came out in our prioritization process. Plan 1 was probably a quarter to a third of the sentiments of either Plan 3 or Plan 4, and there was no support at the cabinet level on any level for Plan 4.
That was the one with 4 million of portables?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that
Thank you for the report.
So I guess that's the thing, you guys have been able to talk about it, think about it, make value-driven statements about it, and had a lot of time to go over it. And I'm not feeling that I have that time to be able to come to that same conclusion. I need to look at it personally, and you guys have been able to do that, talk with each other.
I have
No,
not.
not
The-
really.
The cabinet.
Oh, yeah, cabinet, yeah.
The cabinet.
Oh, sure, yeah, that's,
So we can
And-
prepare for today.
Well, I understand that you, and that's not a judgment, that's saying you've had the time to do it, and I think,
Can I ask a question before we go too much into discussion?
you're right there.
So, just for Lydia,
Finish line.
finish line, so for Lydia, looking, at the cost estimates, so these are incremental costs. And they're, even, let's just look at the general fund, what is our ability on the general fund level to absorb? How much of a driving factor should that be since they vary so much?
Well,
18.
after all my years of experience, this is not a big variance, so
Okay.
I consider 1 to 8 million a big variance. These to me aren't,
So the 1.5?
it's really not, obviously, I prefer to go with the lower, but not when I think of it globally. Also, we've got to remember that we have to identify how we're gonna pay for it, because it's either gonna be 16, 17, or 17, 18.
It's coming one way or another.
So for me, rather than fret, we're gonna get there, it's just when we get there, we need to plan for it. And if we can start planning for it, and we will have to start planning for it now, whatever option is decided on, to be able to accommodate that in 17, 18.
Okay,
Sorry.
Yeah.
that helps.
can I ask, why did you guys call them Plan 4 versus Plan 3?
Because I think that, I'll answer that. In Plan 3, we're making the same
But can I hear, can I hear from
Sure.
the people that work? Kind
Absolutely.
of what is everyone's position on it, and then you can summarize on it.
There's all day K. So that was
In plan for.
in plan for all the K, modified class size in order to do that, but all families would have all day K opportunities. We weren't moving, this is Carolyn, we weren't moving first graders, and I thought that was important for me to think about if Crystal Springs had to move 4 out of 7 first graders, and Kokanee was gonna have to move first grade classrooms. So we had the fewest amount of move of students, and we talked about probably needing portables at Morelands and Fernwood, and because we see growth going there. So for me, it just seemed if we were going to do increase more belly buttons in a box, what was going to be the get out of it, and it would be full day K for all kids. And I thought that was important as we think about kindergartners wanting and needing a really solid full day of kindergarten. That was me.
What did you think, Kathy? Did you have anything
The same.
different?
All of them are ugly. And there's gonna be a lot of concern and strife around it. Anything we do, because it's gonna upset the norm, right? And we're talking about our youngest learners. So the good part about 4 for me is the win is every child gets all day kindergarten. It's still difficult. There's still lots of compromises that need to be made, but that's the win. In Plan 3, only some of the kids get full day, and there's still all the angst with it. So that was my bias on 4.
With the
Increase-
fact that people would have to, the
Yeah.
angst, meaning that some get it and then the other families are going to be upset that,
Well, you're not only not gonna get it, you're gonna put your kid on a bus and they're gonna go someplace.
which
And
they're already doing. I think our community's already kind of incorporated that to a certain degree, right?
But not the half day part, right? We're
Oh,
pretty
we-
used to getting full day if we want it and can pay for it. So
And we're not
now,
gonna get that.
now you're not gonna get it because the
taking away some full day.
prioritization, right, is different than that, and you're gonna have to move. That's gonna have some blowback to it, and as it should, right? None of them are good. But for
And
me.
you have a bigger class size and.
Right, and you've got bigger class sizes,
That's
and the gain is, we still have kids in that situation, so that was my bias on that.
Right. I appreciate hearing from each of you, honestly.
It's a good point.
I really
Go around.
appreciate it.
I guess for me, I kind of looked at it as, what is maximizing the state? And what I heard from the board is, let's maximize state full day care wherever we can and as many places as we can. I think the other thing that we were trying to look at is, how do we eliminate that tuition-based craziness that I think we talked about earlier? And I think before we knew the state was going to fund, this was one way that we could eliminate that full day K tuition-based issue that we had there. I think it also looked at moving us a step further to where we would have to be a year earlier. And I think, from my perspective, it was, if we have to hire 20 teachers, let's try to be in front of our neighboring districts and see if we can try to leverage that as a positive. And then the third thing I looked at was sort of, looking just at a small segment of kids and not looking at globally was what was the best for this segment of kids. That's kind of my filters as I went through.
For me, I couldn't reconcile the have and have-nots. In this district, when we've gone through lots of budget cutting exercises, when we would try to eliminate a program, the majority would come back and say, implement a fee, we will pay it. We do not want to lose anything we already have. And there would be folks losing the ability to have full-day kindergarten at this district. And I think you will lose those parents to private placements in droves. Because we are used to, if we want to keep it, we are willing to pay for it. And if they can't pay for it here, they'll go elsewhere. So the whole inequity really bothered me. And then the other thing is, I do like getting out in front. It's gonna happen in 17, 18. I think starting to plan for it now and getting out in front could be very beneficial. And then finally, I don't wanna be one of the very few districts that isn't offering, district-wide full-day kindergarten. And how do you justify that and explain that to your community? Like Washington, who increased 900 students this year, looks like they'll be able to find a way. I like that we found a way that we could make it work, and that at the end of the day, if you have a current school-age child who you put through full-day kindergarten, how do we explain that you can't have that for your subsequent children?
I'm a little bit of an outlier, I'm on the fence. I think that there are, I certainly appreciate the equity issue. There are operational difficulties with Plan 4 that our department, for instance, will spend a lot of time trying to figure out. And yet on the other side of the spectrum, there are operational difficulties with Plan 1 that are going to be difficult to figure out. And we don't get the benefit of having full-day kindergarten for everybody. So I am really struggling with any of the plans, as imperfect as they are, and obviously whatever the board decides to do, we'll do our best to implement as faithfully as possible. But I can see benefits with falling on either side of the fence. They're just
What's the benefit to you with Plan 3?
none at all.
Oh, which plan are you going between, you say that you're struggling with?
If it were me, it would be Plan 4, where we get full-day kindergarten for everybody, or Plan 1, which is as close to what we're doing right now.
Oh, I see, okay.
And we deal with primary center, which is imperfect. We deal with a lot of students moving around.
But we're already doing it.
And, and the reality that we're actually going to have fewer full-day K opportunities because of classroom space. The dynamic of raising class sizes and introducing a lot of unassigned teachers into the system has complexities that we're going to have to really think.
And you're seeing the other side of it, that not everybody has that.
Oh, we've seen it.
Yeah, they see.
But
I'm not
you have to
saying
deal, you
everybody
have to
sees
deal.
No, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that as I think about weighing where success lies, it's really hard for me to see that either of them, both of them are going to be really hard to do, and both of them have pluses and minuses.
But I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I go back and say one thing that was really powerful to me was, my daughter will be in elementary school next year. She might have a large class, okay? That's 1 year. You can never get that back kindergarten. If you only got half day and you wanted full day, you can never get that back. And you're probably more impacted by that than you will for having a large class.
And just to tie in, I understand that Plan 1 is closest to what our current plan is, but we know our current plan has a significant negative impact on our families right now. We know that you hear that, we hear that with those challenges with having to do kindergarten classroom moves, which is undesirable. And so I think taking a look at this from that equity standpoint of providing it, I think it hits right on what the board directed us to do, which is to provide as much state-funded full K to as many as possible. I think it hits on that, plus the benefits of reduced operational costs with transportation. But then also portables, we know we're going to need them anyway, but there's also reduced cost with purchasing of buses. So I think all in all, that filters out for less of an impact on our families. That was my perspective.
So that's a summary of probably 15 hours of conversation that we've had on this topic over the last 2
No,
months.
but I'm glad glad I
Only
wanted to hear
50
everybody's
hours.
voice.
Yeah.
And I wish
Great,
the
that was
other
great.
stakeholders sitting there too, and I want to hear it, so it's important. Especially when we're not part of these conversations, to understand where everybody's coming from. If we're the ones making the decision, I don't understand where everybody's coming from, then.
And I'll jump on that. I think the communication will be important. So having been someone who's on, you know, like the camera and then now here and seeing information and getting out that clarity of what the story is and why, and here's, you know, choices, and making that very clear, I think is important. I think it's gonna be hard for some of the community to embrace whatever it is we choose. As I hear the different things, and that was exceedingly beneficial for me. I'm a numbers guy, so I have 713 reasons why I would favor Plan 4. And that's the kids who are gonna get full day that wouldn't otherwise get it. And I have whatever the other, going back to the number of classrooms that are gonna be, the belly buttons that are gonna be squished. You know, I have 7.5 reasons, and 8.5 reasons, and 7 reasons, and 8 reasons, and 2 reasons, and 4 reasons to be really concerned. Okay, and so I think I'm leaning towards 4, but, and for 713 reasons, and for all of those, I mean, how do we say they're not more crowded classrooms? I mean, we have to say that, and that we're giving, you know, that shared burden, we're all in this together. How do we work together? And the challenges for finding those teachers and supporting those teachers, and, you know, if that's, especially as cabinet, you guys are the ones that get the opportunity to implement this. It's a great opportunity, it really is, you know, and we can look at all the negative at it. It's a great opportunity to provide education to more kids at the earliest part of their life. And so, you know, there's reasons why it'd be a challenge, but, and I guess, to me, I hear you, I see 713 reasons to do it, and the other reasons, you know, we have to support.
You know, I had liked Plan 4 as well, coming into this, but then hearing Mr. Patel talk about the impact of teachers, the fact that the voters of this state already said that we want lower class size, we're working toward that goal, that's another barrier and hurdle, I think, with that. So, when I was ranking things, I was kind of looking at Plan 2, which got no votes. That was my favorite, because that seemed to be, the trade-off would be the status quo class size ratios, but spending more money on portables we really don't need for a year. But, you know, where is that trade-off in writing the check for stuff to provide the same class size and the same kind of staffing, you know, considerations that we have for one more year?
And just, we recommend, we knew we needed to come in with a recommendation, we've been talking about that for a couple of weeks. But we recommend.
So, I like going last. So I
haven't heard Sandy yet.
I know that's true. No, I started, so you're not gonna hear anything conclusive yet, but because I'm at a school where class sizes are higher, and I've seen what that looks like, you know, Sunrise, so I have.
They have higher class sizes?
Because we have 1 5th grade classes, we have kids, and they're
Fifth
going
grade.
out way moving up the system, it's just how it is, and it's tough for the kids, and, so, sorry, this is one of these situations. So I struggled with the logistics, because I know the move for 2017 is going to be really hard on buildings anyways, just from moving people and figuring out staffing ratios, just moving equipment and all. But then we had that study session where we saw results of what happens when kids have full day kindergarten from a testing standpoint.
That was in my head.
And the difference is huge. There is a quantifiable outcome when kids have full day kindergarten. Yeah. And so, I was hoping my cost question would help me pick one or the other. So that's where I'm weighing. I still go last. Can you go say
I personally, I'm gonna be upfront, I'm not gonna make a decision tonight. I don't feel comfortable with this much information, I need to go through it. And I'm so appreciative of all the work you guys did and everything you said, and I'm sorry because I was very caught off guard with this whole conversation tonight, but I respect your work, I really do. I respect that each of you told all of us why but I need to, like, process it, I just need to.
Can we, because we're not making a decision until
Well, I thought we're
January.
giving direction,
Yeah, we're just giving them.
but I just personally don't feel comfortable with.
So, and the purpose of some kind of direction tonight is to be able to communicate with people who, outside of this room, who are gonna be impacted by whichever plan we choose, so that they have some forewarning and some opportunity to think about.
Right, no, I understood that. I was
We were
just trying
told
to
back
see
in
if we could.
October too that we had to make the decision right then, so I guess I'm
You
just.
kind of had to.
We have to.
With the information we had.
I need a little more time to process, that's all I'm saying.
Okay, I just thought maybe here are my priorities.
Yes, I would love to, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. So I guess for me, they're all bad on equity. 3, the kids that need all-day kindergarten don't have access to it. And 4, those same kids are in larger classes and that. So they all have issues, it's just kind of a trade-off of which inequitable situation. I definitely was very persuaded by the data of the benefits of full day, and so that definitely is a huge priority for me. I was very clear in the meeting in October that if we could not move first graders, that was important to me too. It just seemed like a lot of extra changes that if we can avoid would be worth it. I am concerned about larger class sizes, but more concerned about getting that, I don't want to call them a resource teacher, but that extra teacher up to speed and being able by next September to have a plan in place where everybody knows what their role is, and it's not one teacher with 30 kids and somebody just comes in for a half an hour or an hour. That being said, someday we are going to have smaller class sizes, and the reality is we're not going to be able to build the 4 or 5 elementary schools at the time the smaller class sizes come in. So we are going to need to be thinking outside the box of how to make that work. What do we do is when we have more belly buttons than boxes in that situation. So we are going to have to start thinking about that. So I'm leaning towards 4 for those reasons, but I guess I would say those are my concerns, is that we can get full day kindergarten to these kiddos for this year. That would be my priority.
Can I throw out a crazy idea, and please feel free to shoot me down, but an idea that came up when Ken and I were in the coordination meetings, that we have this conversations with the board meeting on January 5th. And so it is an opportunity, but we'll be face to face with parents. And I don't know if we want to present 4 complicated solutions. Certainly, I think we want to narrow it down. But it is an opportunity to get community feedback. I'm guessing it's best to have one idea to get feedback on.
I'm very concerned about that in the format of the conversations with the board
Okay.
on a variety of different levels. So this is a very complex topic.
It is.
So it's going to be very challenging for communication out. So I appreciate as much direction as possible to try to simplify that. With the conversations with the board in your circles, truly a maximum of 15 people, and that's still a challenge for you. And the structure of that currently is for individuals from the community with 3 very broad topics, questions, for them to bring their specific issue to talk and have a conversation with you about. So there's a completely different structure and expectation with conversations with the board. Additionally, one of the big challenges we have is we don't know who our kindergarten families are.
Right.
So how are we going to target them and encourage their participation? And then also what happens if we get, 200 people there? Oh goodness. I mean, in 25,
Just logistically.
So let's think about maybe what input are we looking for and then the best way to gather that.
Okay.
Because conversations with the board is a great way to connect with families, but it's not going to give you quantitative information. It's also not going to give you a broad representation of how all stakeholders are feeling. So,
Okay.
something.
And if I can,
That's great input too.
to jump in on that, I think since we know that they're all bad on some version of equity, we all know that they harm or feel like they harm some group. If you go out there, you're gonna hear from the group who feels that. And in some sense, we just have to make the decision that chooses, in some sense, the people who are gonna get the benefit that we think is most important. And I think, and that's just, it's a net benefit analysis, and it's tough. There are no great options. So I'm somewhat concerned about that. I think it's, and we never have perfect information, but we still do have to make a decision.
But I appreciate that you want,
I think it's
I don't
great,
think that
absolutely.
that's the time that we can do it, but I appreciate that you want it, because I mean, I'm feeling a lot of the same way you are, is that I do feel we could have stakeholders at the table with us here. It doesn't have to be everyone at conversation with the board, but some community members, some, where we are getting some type of feedback.
Or the mitigations, right? Because each one of these chooses different things, and some of them you can't come back to ever get again, right? If we don't give full day kindergarten to 713 students, that's just lost forever. If we force more kids into a classroom and then someone has a bad 3rd or 4th grade experience, you lose that forever. So it's kind of choosing your poison in some sense, but it's also choosing opportunity. So thinking through those mitigation.
But I don't ever get my daughter's 5th grade year back either, and that makes me go, am I gonna switch her to private school? Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of that as a parent, I don't get that year back.
And then is there a
So, we all don't get that, which I understand kindergarten's an important year, but we all don't get that year back, right?
Right,
And that could be the most
right.
important year for our child.
and to go
for a
there,
variety of
and
reasons.
I think we think that, and I'll just use the word selfishly. If we think about, well, I'm gonna worry about me and my 5th grade year.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying
Yeah.
you, I'm saying, but when
As a parent.
no, as a district, when we allow ourselves to say, oh, I really don't like this because it hurts me this way, rather than saying, well, how does it help us as a community? Where do we want to be as a community? And do we want to bend over backwards to give that 1st grade, that full day kindergarten experience to everyone in the district? And are we willing to ask everyone else? Of course, your 5th grade, some of our 5th grade experiences are going to be they're going to be more challenged, and we can try and mitigate them. But if there's more belly buttons in a room, it's going to be a different set of challenges. Can we celebrate that and find a way to be willing to adopt that? Because we're giving to someone else in us. We're one big organism, or if we can't. Because if we allow that to build, that's my view. And if we can't buy in that thinking, then we start adding up or listening to who screams the loudest, or who when they're hurt, right? It's real hurt, and so can we not have that happen? I don't know.
Or I just think our teachers are already struggling to facilitate the kids. Mark, my husband works in the class, literally, 3 days a week. Every Monday, every Wednesday, every Friday. He works in 2 different teachers' classes, not just Gianna's. So he has a reading group. So we're already seeing, we get firsthand experience. So I'm not just talking about our personal experiences, but they're already having enough time implementing reading groups, levels, math.
I think you're on the same page that all plans suck here and somebody gets hurt. And if we're just trying to figure out.
Or it's not ideal.
Yeah.
What does the class size go back to the next year? Because we're talking about a 1 year. With Plan 4, we're talking about 1 year.
So, at a minimum, I would see them going back to current class size ratios, but that's also going to be 17, 18. It's going to be the first year of supposedly the 2-year budget cycle where the legislature is supposed to take the final plunge on all of McCleary.
I'll be the Pope that year.
So, just saying. So it's hard to really predict knowing exactly what. My sense would be that the legislature is probably going to take some level of step in the next 2-year budget to further reduce class sizes, particularly at the K-3 level, but it's hard to predict exactly what that might be.
Can you tell me again what you mean by reduced class sizes? I'm
So they
confused.
fund more teachers per 1,000 students.
Than they are now.
Than they are now.
And then they will require that it not be ratio maybe, but that it will have so many teachers per the classroom.
That's kind of the big unknown with the legislature. If they actually do it based on, you have to demonstrate actual self-contained classrooms that meet these sizes, we and many other districts are
Won't get
sunk.
this.
Yeah.
If they say you can meet a ratio, and so you
But
can
with-
have more teachers in general.
But with opening North Creek High School, then and I know we've all been here on the line. With the opening, with opening North Creek High School, that will take 1,500 or so students out of our elementaries, and we'll be able to, then the next year,
There's kind of always an unknown with class size, like Sunrise is such a great example. It's just how many fifth graders show up
yeah,
that year and how you can divide them.
So the projection is about 1,700. So overall, district-wide, the move from K6 to K5 drops overall elementary enrollment by about 1,700 students. And then the boundary adjustments redistribute many of those 10,000 remaining students to take them out of more crowded areas into areas with more capacity.
and this plan for also would mean that the kindergartners that were gonna move to Maywood, let's say from Kokomo in 2016, and then would have to possibly go to another school in 2017 because their home school was changing, right? Like, they were at Kokomo for kindergarten, but now they go to Maywood, but now their Kokomo was changing
To something else.
to something else.
Yeah, so you minimize the moves.
That would have been 3 moves essentially for that, or it's not really, because I guess it would have been a okay, never mind. I
So
don't
that,
think that really
again, but you're on the right track though, in your thinking, and one of the things we've talked about from the standpoint of minimizing moves in 16, 17, that might, it's a much more straightforward plan as far as you essentially have 3 schools, Kokanee, Shelton View, Crystal Springs, that, Crystal Springs and Shelton View are here at Frank Love. You've got Kokanee here at Maywood Hills. That's much more straightforward than, say what Plan 2 looks like, or even what Plan 1 looks like. So that's one of the things we've been wrestling with, is just kind of that, how do we keep it as simple as possible, knowing in 17, 18, lots of things change.
And everybody's moving.
You get more people are moving, not everybody, but certainly
Okay,
more
yeah.
people are moving, right?
Yeah. But essentially, schools are changing.
Well, 1,200 kids are gonna move, at elementary are gonna move in 17, 18, just because of boundary adjustments.
I have sat here for almost 2 hours saying nothing, and it's really hard. And I know I'm stepping out of protocol, but I'm gonna say something. I've heard a lot of discussion about kids. I've heard very little discussion about teachers. We've sat here and no one has asked or directed a question our way. I had 3 minutes at a board meeting. If you think in 3 minutes, I said everything about this plan, actually a minute and a half. I didn't. These plans stink, every single one of them. You're enabling the legislature, is what you're doing. Every single time they underfund something, they pass a mandate without any funding source attached to it. And every single time we do all we can to make it work, we are enabling an alcoholic. And that alcoholic is the state legislature. You can start saying to the members of this community, we can't do this because the state has not provided us the funding to do it. And you can start building a coalition through your conversation with the board of a group of North Shore parents to put demands on the legislature to do what the courts have ordered them to do. And nobody is doing that. I have not seen this school board once really enter into a deep conversation about the clear? Not one.
I don't know if I would agree with that.
But I
Okay,
do like
disagree.
hearing your
But
Well,
I'm,
yeah, I think we have to be a little careful, because if we're gonna set up stakeholder feedback, we have to make sure
okay.
it's, I apologize, I value your comments, but because we don't have PTA representation or anything like that, like, I think it's important, because it's, the point being that if the state does give money for full-day tuition, and we say no to it, that does directly impact parents, a lot of, again, middle-class parents' pocketbooks.